What if I told you Al Capone's criminal playbook became Wall Street's business model? From money laundering to bribing officials, the techniques are identical. Capone got 11 years for tax evasion. Wall Street executives got 0. In this video, I'll show you 3 cases that prove this connection. Enron, the 2008 crisis, and HSBC laundering cartel money. You'll see how the same crimes that destroyed Capone now go unpunished. The only difference? One was inside the system. One wasn't. This isn't conspiracy theory. These are documented court cases. By the end, you'll never look at a bank the same way again. Stay with me. The Hidden Truths starts now.
What if I told you that the greatest criminal mastermind in American history didn't carry a Tommy gun? What if his weapon of choice wasn't a baseball bat in a Chicago warehouse, but something far more dangerous? Something you'd find in any corporate boardroom today? Stay with me on this one, because what you're about to discover might just shatter everything you thought you knew about crime, money, and power in America. Picture this. It's 1929, and Al Capone is sitting at the head of a mahogany table in the Lexington Hotel. He's wearing a custom-tailored suit that cost more than most Americans earn in a year. Around him, accountants shuffle papers. Lawyers whisper legal strategies. His organization pulls in over $100 million annually. That's roughly $1.5 billion in today's money. He controls politicians, police chiefs, and judges. He's diversified his revenue streams across multiple industries. He's pioneered sophisticated money laundering techniques that would inspire financial criminals for the next century. Now, fast forward to 2008. A different man sits at a different mahogany table, this time in a Manhattan skyscraper. He's also wearing a custom suit. He's also surrounded by accountants and lawyers. His organization has also captured regulators and politicians. And he's about to help crash the global economy while walking away with a golden parachute worth tens of millions. You've probably seen photos of both men. But here's the question nobody asks. What's the actual difference between them? Because from where I'm standing, the playbook looks almost identical. See, we've been sold this comfortable lie our entire lives. We're taught that organized crime and legitimate business exist in separate worlds. Criminals operate in the shadows. Corporations operate in the light. One group breaks the law, the other follows it. But what if that's just a story we tell ourselves to sleep better at night? What if the same techniques, the same structures, the same ruthless logic that made Capone the king of Chicago are the exact same principles that built Wall Street into the most powerful financial machine on earth? I know that sounds dramatic, maybe even conspiratorial. But stick with me until the end of this video, because I'm not going to give you theories or speculation. I'm going to show you the receipts, real cases, real names, real money. And by the time we're done, you'll never look at a bank the same way again. Here's what most people get wrong about Al Capone. They remember the violence, the St. Valentine's Day massacre, the bootlegging, the image of a cigar-chomping gangster in a fedora. But that's the Hollywood version. The real Capone, the one who built an empire that survived for decades, was something far more sophisticated. He was, in every meaningful sense, a CEO. He understood vertical integration before business schools had a name for it. He mastered regulatory capture when most legitimate businessmen couldn't even spell the term. He created shell companies, offshore structures, and layered financial schemes that took federal investigators years to untangle. And here's the part that should make you uncomfortable. Almost every single one of those techniques is not only legal on Wall Street today, it's considered best practice. Now, I'm not saying every banker is a criminal. That would be lazy, and honestly, it would miss the point entirely. What I am saying is something more disturbing. The line between organized crime and organized finance is a lot thinner than anyone wants to admit. And the story of how that line got blurred, how the methods of Chicago's most notorious gangster became the operating manual for the world's most powerful financial institutions, that story starts in an unexpected place. And before we go deeper into this rabbit hole, I want to pause for just a second. Because if you're still here, if what I'm saying is resonating with something you've felt but maybe couldn't quite articulate, that nagging sense that the game is rigged, that the rules are different depending on which side of the mahogany table you're sitting on, then I need you to do something for me. Drop a comment below. Tell me what's going through your mind right now. Have you ever looked at a financial scandal and thought, how is this not a crime? Have you ever wondered why certain people seem untouchable while others get destroyed for far less? I genuinely want to know your story, your perspective, because this channel isn't just about me talking at you. It's about building a conversation around the things that actually matter, the hidden architectures of power and money that shape all of our lives whether we realize it or not. And look, I'll be honest with you. When you hit that like button, when you take 2 seconds to subscribe and click that notification bell, you're not just doing me a favor. You're sending a signal to the algorithm that this kind of content deserves to exist. You're telling YouTube that people actually want to understand how the world really works, not just consume another dopamine hit and scroll on. Every like, every subscription, every comment, that's what allows this channel to reach more people who are hungry for this knowledge. It's what lets me keep digging into these stories, keep pulling back the curtain on systems that most media won't touch because it's too complicated or too uncomfortable. So if this resonates with you, if you want to be part of a community that refuses to accept surface-level explanations, then welcome. You're in the right place. Hit subscribe, stay with me, and let's keep going. Because the story is about to get a whole lot more interesting. Now, where were we? Right. We were talking about where this all begins, about the unexpected origin point of the Wall Street playbook. To understand how Al Capone built his empire, you first need to understand the world that created him. In 1920, the United States government made one of the most consequential decisions in its history. It banned alcohol. The 18th Amendment, known as Prohibition, made the manufacture, sale, and transportation of alcoholic beverages illegal across the entire nation. Now, on paper, this was supposed to usher in an era of moral purity, healthier families, and reduced crime. In reality, it did the exact opposite. Prohibition created the single greatest business opportunity in American criminal history. Overnight, a product that millions of Americans desperately wanted became illegal. And whenever you create a gap between what people want and what the law allows, someone will step in to fill that gap. That someone, in Chicago, was Alphonse Gabriel Capone. But here's what makes Capone different from every petty bootlegger and street corner gangster of his era. He didn't just sell illegal alcohol. He built a machine, a system, a fully integrated business model that would have made the titans of industry jealous. By 1929, Capone's organization was generating an estimated $100 million per year. Adjust that for inflation, and you're looking at roughly $1.5 billion in today's money. To put that in perspective, that's more than the annual revenue of many publicly traded companies. And he did it all without a single business degree, without venture capital, without a board of directors. He did it through pure strategic thinking, ruthless execution, and a deep understanding of how power actually works. The first pillar of the Capone model was revenue diversification. See, Capone understood something that most criminals of his era didn't. Relying on a single income stream is dangerous. If that stream dries up, you're finished. So while bootlegging was his primary business, he expanded aggressively into gambling operations, prostitution rings, and protection rackets. Each of these verticals fed into the others. The speakeasies where he sold alcohol also hosted gambling tables. The gambling attracted wealthy clients who might be interested in other services. The protection rackets ensured that legitimate businesses in his territory paid tribute, which funded expansion into new areas. It was vertical and horizontal integration decades before those terms became MBA buzzwords. Capone wasn't just running a criminal enterprise, he was running a conglomerate. The second pillar was what we might call institutional capture, though Capone would have used simpler language. He bought people, not just anyone. He bought the people who mattered. Historians estimate that at the height of his power, Capone had half the Chicago police force on his payroll. Judges received monthly envelopes. Politicians owed their elections to his money and influence. This wasn't random bribery. It was systematic corruption designed to create a protective shield around his operations. When your enemies get arrested and you don't, that's not luck, that's strategy. Capone understood that the law is only as powerful as the people who enforce it. Control those people, and you effectively control the law itself. This is a revelation that seems obvious in hindsight, but at the time it represented a transformation in how organized crime operated. Before Capone, gangsters ran from the police. After Capone, the smart ones simply hired them. The third pillar might be the most fascinating of all: money laundering. You've probably heard this term 1,000 times, but do you know where it actually comes from? The popular story, and there's debate among historians about its accuracy, is that the term originated with Capone himself. His organization reportedly purchased laundromats, cash-intensive businesses where it was nearly impossible to verify how many customers actually came through the door. Dirty money from illegal operations would be mixed with legitimate revenue from the laundromats, emerging clean on the other side. Whether or not Capone literally invented this technique, he certainly perfected it. His accountants created layers of shell companies, nominee owners, and complex financial structures designed to obscure the true source of funds. Sound familiar? It should. These are the exact same techniques that would later become standard practice in offshore banking, corporate tax avoidance, and yes, Wall Street financial engineering. The fourth pillar was violence, but not in the way you might think. Popular culture portrays Capone as a bloodthirsty killer, but the truth is more nuanced. Violence in the Capone organization was strategic. It was risk management by other means. Competitors who threatened market share were eliminated not out of passion, but out of cold business logic. The St. Valentine's Day Massacre, where 7 members of a rival gang were lined up against a wall and executed, wasn't an act of rage. It was a calculated message to everyone in Chicago about the cost of competition. In corporate terms, Capone understood that barriers to entry keep profits high, and there's no barrier more effective than the credible threat of death. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because what I've just described isn't ancient history. These 4 pillars, diversification, institutional capture, money laundering, and the strategic elimination of competition, didn't disappear when Capone went to prison. They evolved, they put on better suits, they hired better lawyers, and they moved to a new address. The journey from Chicago's South Side to Wall Street's trading floors is shorter than you might think. And the hidden truth behind that transformation reveals something profound about how power really operates in America. Drop a comment below with the words "same playbook" if you're starting to see the connections I'm talking about. So here's where the story takes a turn that most history books won't tell you. When Prohibition ended in 1933, something interesting happened to organized crime in America. The easy money dried up almost overnight. Suddenly, selling alcohol was legal again, which meant legitimate businesses with better distribution networks and lower overhead could undercut the mob on price. The criminal organizations that had grown fat on bootlegging profits faced an existential crisis. They could either shrink back into small-time operations, or they could evolve. They chose evolution. And the man who architected that transformation wasn't Al Capone. He was already in prison by then, taken down by tax evasion charges in 1931. The architect was someone far less famous but arguably more influential in shaping the relationship between organized crime and American finance. His name was Meyer Lansky, and if Capone was the muscle of the mob, Lansky was its brain. Meyer Lansky understood something profound about the nature of money. He realized that cash itself was just paper. What mattered was where that paper could go and what it could become. While other mobsters were figuring out how to expand into new criminal ventures, narcotics, labor racketeering, loan sharking, Lansky was asking a different question entirely. He wanted to know how to make illegal money indistinguishable from legal money. Not just clean enough to spend, but clean enough to invest, clean enough to grow, clean enough to pass down to the next generation without anyone ever knowing where it came from. This mentality shift changed everything. Lansky didn't just want to hide money, he wanted to legitimize it. And to do that, he needed to understand how the legitimate financial system actually worked. The revelations that came out of Lansky's operations over the following decades paint a picture that should disturb anyone who believes in the separation between criminal enterprise and legitimate finance. Lansky is widely credited with pioneering the use of Swiss bank accounts for American organized crime. He established relationships with banks in Switzerland that would accept large cash deposits with no questions asked, protected by Swiss banking secrecy laws. But he didn't stop there. Lansky helped create the offshore banking infrastructure in the Caribbean, particularly in the Bahamas, and later in other jurisdictions, that would become the backbone of global tax evasion and money laundering for the next 70 years. The hidden truth is that many of the financial structures we now consider standard features of international banking, numbered accounts, shell corporations in tax havens, complex layering of ownership to obscure beneficial owners, were either invented or perfected by organized crime figures looking for ways to integrate their money into the legitimate economy. But Lansky's most consequential decision was where he chose to invest once the money was clean. And that destination was Wall Street. Throughout the 1940s, 1950s, and 1960s, mob money flowed into legitimate American businesses at a scale that's difficult to comprehend. They bought into casinos, obviously, but also hotels, restaurants, construction companies, waste management firms, and labor unions that controlled entire industries. And they bought stocks. They invested in the market just like any other wealthy American, except their capital came from gambling operations, loan sharking, and various other enterprises. The impact of this cannot be overstated. For decades, organized crime money was quietly mingling with pension funds, institutional investments, and the savings of ordinary Americans in the great mixing bowl of the stock market. Now here's where I want to challenge the conventional narrative, because the story we usually hear goes something like this. The mob was this external corrupting force that infiltrated an otherwise clean financial system. The bad guys snuck into the good guys' playground. But the more you dig into the backstage reality of American finance during this period, the more that story falls apart. Wall Street in the early 20th century was not some pristine temple of capitalism. It was a barely regulated casino, where insider trading was standard practice, where stock manipulation was an art form, and where the line between aggressive business tactics and outright fraud was essentially non-existent. The crash of 1929 wasn't caused by organized crime. It was caused by Wall Street itself, by speculation, leverage, and the same kind of greed-driven decision-making that would cause crisis after crisis in the decades to come. So when mob money started flowing into Wall Street, it wasn't corruption entering a clean system. It was two corrupt systems meeting and recognizing each other. The mob brought cash and a willingness to operate outside legal boundaries. Wall Street brought legitimacy and access to the machinery of wealth creation. It was a partnership, even if neither side would have described it that way, and the techniques flowed in both directions. The mob learned about securities, about market manipulation, about the power of controlling information. Wall Street, whether consciously or not, absorbed lessons about corruption, about capturing regulators, about the strategic value of operating in the gray areas where law and lawlessness blur together. This brings us to a question that nobody in polite company wants to ask, but I think it's essential if we're going to understand how we got to where we are today. The conventional wisdom says that Wall Street occasionally gets infected by bad actors who bring criminal techniques into the financial system. But what if that's backwards? What if the criminal techniques were always there, just waiting to be refined? What if Meyer Lansky didn't teach Wall Street how to hide money? What if Wall Street taught him, and he simply applied those lessons more aggressively? The journey from Chicago speakeasies to Manhattan trading floors isn't a story of contamination. It's a story of convergence. Two systems built on the same fundamental principles finally recognizing that they were playing the same game all along. Type "follow the money" in the comments if you're starting to see how deep this rabbit hole goes. Now let me show you exactly what I mean with 3 cases that should make your blood boil. Because once you see these parallels laid out side by side, you cannot unsee them. The hidden truth about modern American finance isn't buried in some conspiracy theory forum. It's right there in the headlines, in the court documents, in the settlements that were paid and then quietly forgotten. Let's start with Enron, a company that in the year 2000 was valued at over $60 billion and was considered one of the most innovative corporations in America. Fortune magazine named it the most innovative company in America for 6 consecutive years. Wall Street analysts couldn't stop singing its praises. And then, in 2001, the whole thing collapsed like a house of cards, and the revelations that emerged were stunning. What Enron executives had done was create a labyrinth of shell companies, over 3,000 of them, with names like LJM Cayman and Chuco Investments. These entities existed for one purpose only: to hide debt and inflate profits. When Enron made a bad investment, they didn't report the loss. They sold the losing asset to one of their own shell companies, booked it as a sale, and kept the bad news off the balance sheet. It was accounting magic, except it wasn't magic at all. It was fraud dressed up in spreadsheets and blessed by one of the most prestigious accounting firms in the world. Now think about that for a second. Al Capone used laundromats and shell companies to hide the source of his money. Enron used shell companies to hide the destination of investor money. The technique was identical. The scale was different. Capone's operation moved maybe $100 million a year. Enron's fraud destroyed $60 billion in shareholder value and wiped out the retirement savings of thousands of employees who had trusted the company with their futures. The impact on ordinary people was catastrophic, but somehow, we don't talk about Enron executives the way we talk about gangsters. Then came 2008, and the transformation of Wall Street's mentality into something Capone himself would have recognized instantly. The financial crisis wasn't caused by a few bad actors. It was caused by a system-wide decision to prioritize short-term profits over everything else, including basic honesty about what was being sold. The mortgage-backed securities and collateralized debt obligations that crashed the global economy were, in essence, adulterated products. During Prohibition, unscrupulous bootleggers would water down whiskey or mix it with dangerous additives to increase their margins. The product looked legitimate, but it was poison. Wall Street did the exact same thing with mortgages. They took toxic loans, mortgages given to people who could never repay them, and mixed them with slightly better loans, got rating agencies to stamp the whole package as safe, and sold it to pension funds, municipalities, and investors around the world. They knew. Internal emails that emerged during investigations showed that the people creating these products referred to them as garbage, as crap, even while their sales teams were pushing them as solid investments. The backstage reality of the 2008 crisis reveals decision after decision made by people who understood exactly what they were doing. This wasn't ignorance. It was a calculated bet that they could extract their bonuses before the whole thing collapsed, and that when it did collapse, someone else would pay the price. They were right. The federal government bailed out the banks to the tune of hundreds of billions of dollars. The executives kept their jobs, their bonuses, their Hampton Beach houses. And how many of them went to prison? 0. Not a single Wall Street executive served jail time for their role in the worst financial catastrophe since the Great Depression. Capone got 11 years for tax evasion, 11 years for not paying taxes on his illegal income. The men who crashed the global economy, destroyed millions of jobs, and caused a wave of foreclosures that displaced families across America, got nothing but a slap on the wrist and a stern talking to from Congress. But perhaps the most damning case is HSBC, because with HSBC we're not even talking about parallel techniques anymore. We're talking about the exact same crime. In 2012, HSBC admitted to laundering $881 million for Mexican and Colombian drug cartels. Not allegedly, not accused of, admitted to. They processed money for organizations responsible for tens of thousands of murders. They did it knowingly, because the compliance department raised red flags that were systematically ignored. And what happened? HSBC paid a fine of $1.9 billion, which sounds like a lot until you realize it represented about 5 weeks of the bank's profits. No one went to prison. The bank kept its license. It continued operating as if nothing had happened. The revelations were explosive, but the consequences were non-existent. So here we are, looking at the mirror between Capone's Chicago and modern Wall Street, and the reflection is uncomfortable. Capone laundered money through laundromats. HSBC laundered money through the global banking system. Capone bribed police and politicians to avoid prosecution. Wall Street spends billions on lobbying and campaign contributions to shape the laws that govern it. Capone used violence to eliminate competition. Wall Street uses predatory pricing, market manipulation, and regulatory capture to achieve the same goal without getting blood on anyone's hands. The only meaningful difference between Al Capone and the modern financial industry is the size of the operation and the sophistication of the legal protection. Capone had good lawyers. Wall Street has armies of them. Capone had politicians on his payroll. Wall Street has entire political parties. Now, I want to go even deeper into this subject, because understanding that the system is rigged is only the first step. The real question is why? Why does this keep happening? Why do the rules seem to apply to some people and not others? The answer lies in understanding how power actually protects itself, and that understanding changes everything about how you see the world. Comment rigged game if you're ready to see just how deep this goes. Let me explain why the system works this way, because understanding the mechanics is the key to seeing the hidden truth behind everything we've discussed so far. There's a phrase that became famous during the 2008 financial crisis: too big to fail. The idea was that certain financial institutions had become so large, so interconnected with the global economy, that allowing them to collapse would cause catastrophic damage to everyone. So the government stepped in with bailouts to prevent that collapse. But here's what most people missed at the time. If a bank is too big to fail, that means it can take enormous risks knowing that taxpayers will cover the losses if things go wrong. It's like playing poker with someone else's money. You can bet as aggressively as you want because you'll keep the winnings but won't pay for the losses. This creates what economists call moral hazard, and it fundamentally breaks the rules of capitalism that we all learn about in school. But too big to fail has a twin concept that's far more disturbing. And it took the aftermath of 2008 for this reality to become undeniable. That concept is too big to jail. When federal prosecutors were considering criminal charges against major financial institutions after the crisis, they faced an uncomfortable dilemma. Criminally prosecuting a bank the size of JP Morgan or Goldman Sachs could potentially destabilize the financial system. A criminal conviction might cause clients to flee, counterparties to cancel contracts, and credit markets to freeze. The impact could ripple across the entire economy. So instead of criminal prosecutions, regulators negotiated settlements, fines measured in billions of dollars that sound impressive in press releases but amount to a small percentage of profits. The decision to pursue fines instead of prison time wasn't made in secret. It was explicitly justified by senior officials at the Department of Justice, who argued that the collateral consequences of prosecution were too severe. Think about what that means. There is now a class of institutions and individuals so powerful that the normal rules of criminal justice simply do not apply to them. That's not conspiracy theory. That's stated policy. Now let me introduce you to a mechanism that makes this whole system self-perpetuating. It's called the revolving door, and once you understand how it works, the backstage reality of American finance becomes crystal clear. Here's how it operates. A young lawyer joins the Securities and Exchange Commission or the Department of Justice right out of law school. They spend 5 or 10 years learning how financial regulation works from the inside. They develop relationships with colleagues. They understand the enforcement process intimately, and they build expertise that's extremely valuable. Then they leave government and join a major Wall Street firm or a law firm that represents Wall Street clients. Their salary immediately jumps from maybe $200,000 to $2 million. Now their job is to help their clients navigate the same regulatory system they just left. They know which arguments will be persuasive because they know the people who'll be evaluating those arguments. They know which investigations to worry about and which ones will quietly go away. But the door revolves in both directions, and this is where it gets really interesting. Wall Street executives frequently leave the private sector to take senior positions in government regulatory agencies. They bring their industry perspective, their relationships with former colleagues who are still in finance, and their fundamental belief that what's good for Wall Street is good for America. When these individuals make decisions about enforcement priorities, about how aggressively to pursue cases, about whether to seek criminal charges or settle for fines, their mentality is shaped by decades of viewing the world from the industry's perspective. The transformation isn't necessarily corrupt in the traditional sense. These people aren't taking bribes. They genuinely believe they're doing the right thing. But the outcome is a regulatory system that's been captured by the industry it's supposed to oversee. The foxes aren't just guarding the henhouse. They designed the henhouse, wrote the rules for the henhouse, and rotate between being foxes and henhouse security guards every few years. This is why corporate crimes almost never result in prison time. When you or I commit a crime, we face a prosecutor whose job is to put us behind bars. When a corporation commits a crime, it faces a negotiation. The company hires former prosecutors and regulators to represent them. Those representatives sit down with their former colleagues across the table. Everyone speaks the same language, shares the same assumptions, and understands the same unwritten rules. The decision is reached through negotiation rather than adversarial prosecution. And the result, almost without exception, is a fine that the company pays from shareholder money, while the individuals who made the criminal decisions face no personal consequences whatsoever. The fine becomes simply a cost of doing business, built into the calculations like any other expense. If laundering money for drug cartels generates $10 billion in profit and costs $2 billion in fines, the rational business decision is obvious. Some economists and legal scholars have started using a term to describe this system: legalized organized crime. It sounds provocative, almost hyperbolic, but the more you examine the structure, the more accurate it becomes. Organized crime traditionally involves an ongoing organization that commits crimes for profit, corrupts public officials to avoid prosecution, and uses various techniques to integrate illegal proceeds into the legitimate economy. Wall Street's largest institutions operate through ongoing organizations. They commit systematic violations of law that generate enormous profits. They have thoroughly captured the regulatory process, and they have access to financial structures that make money laundering look primitive. The only difference is that much of what they do has been made technically legal through decades of lobbying, campaign contributions, and the revolving door we just discussed. And this brings me to a realization that crystallizes everything. Al Capone made one strategic error that modern Wall Street has corrected. He didn't have a political action committee. He bribed politicians individually, which was illegal, and created evidence that could be used against him. Today, you don't need to bribe anyone. You simply donate millions to their campaigns, fund super PACs that support their elections, and hire their former staffers at inflated salaries. The decisions you need get made, the regulations you don't like get weakened, and the prosecutions that might threaten you get quietly dropped. It's all perfectly legal because the people who benefit from this system are the same people who write the laws defining what's legal. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because understanding the system is one thing. Understanding what it means for you, for your decisions, for how you navigate a world built on these foundations, that requires a different kind of revelation. Comment legal crime if you're connecting the dots on how this machine actually operates. So let's come back to where we started. Two images. Two men at mahogany tables. Al Capone in 1929, surrounded by accountants and lawyers, running an empire that generated the equivalent of $1.5 billion a year. A Wall Street CEO in 2008, surrounded by accountants and lawyers, running an institution that would help crash the global economy and walk away without consequence. I asked you at the beginning of this video what the difference was between them. Now, after everything we've explored together, I think you can see the answer more clearly. The difference isn't in the techniques they used. The difference isn't in the scale of the harm they caused. The difference isn't even in their fundamental mentality or the decisions they made to prioritize profit over everything else. The difference is simply this: one of them was inside the system and one of them wasn't. That's the real masterclass from Al Capone. Not how to run a criminal enterprise, not how to launder money or bribe officials or eliminate competition. The real lesson is far more uncomfortable. The system doesn't punish behavior. The system punishes outsiders. Capone broke the rules of a game he wasn't supposed to be playing in the first place. He was an immigrant son from Brooklyn who clawed his way to power through bootlegging and violence. He never had the pedigree, the connections, the institutional legitimacy that would have protected him. When the federal government decided to take him down, they found a way. Tax evasion of all things. Not murder, not bootlegging, not corruption. Taxes. They got him on a technicality because that's all they needed. He was never going to be allowed to win, no matter how sophisticated his operation became. Compare that to the executives who engineered the 2008 crisis. These were people who attended the right schools, joined the right clubs, hired the right lawyers, and contributed to the right political campaigns. They were inside the system from birth. When their decisions destroyed trillions in wealth and devastated millions of families, the system responded not with prosecution, but with protection. Bailouts to save their institutions, settlements that let them admit no wrongdoing, a collective agreement among regulators, politicians, and the financial industry itself to treat the whole catastrophe as a systemic problem rather than a collection of individual crimes. The hidden truth is that identical behavior produces radically different outcomes depending on who's doing it. This isn't cynicism. This is observable reality backed by decades of evidence. Now, some people hear this and feel despair. If the game is rigged, why even try to understand it? But I think that reaction misses the point entirely. Knowledge isn't about despair. Knowledge is about clarity. When you understand how the system actually works, not how it's supposed to work in textbooks, but how it functions in the backstage reality of American power, you can make better decisions about your own journey. You stop being surprised when scandals emerge and no one goes to prison. You stop expecting institutions to police themselves. You develop a more accurate mental model of where power lives, how it protects itself, and what the actual rules are versus the rules they teach in civics class. There's a saying that gets thrown around in certain circles: crime doesn't pay. And for most people, in most circumstances, that's probably true. If you try to rob a bank, you'll likely end up in prison. If you sell drugs on a street corner, the odds are eventually going to catch up with you. Small-time crime is a losing game because the system is designed to catch and punish small-time criminals. But the revelation that emerges from everything we've discussed is that the saying needs an asterisk. Crime doesn't pay unless you commit it at sufficient scale, with sufficient sophistication, and with sufficient access to $2,000 an hour lawyers who can negotiate your settlement instead of your sentence. At that level, crime pays extraordinarily well. It pays bonuses, stock options, golden parachutes, and speaking fees after you leave the industry to write a memoir about leadership. I want to leave you with a question, not because I have the answer, but because I think the question itself is valuable. If Al Capone were born today, if he had the same intelligence, the same ambition, the same ruthless strategic mind, but he was born into a middle-class family in 1990s America, what would he do? Would he build a criminal empire in the traditional sense? Would he risk prison, violence, and an early death fighting over territory with other gangsters? Or would he look at the landscape, analyze the incentive structures, and realize that the real money, the real power, the real safety lies in a different direction? Would he go to business school, get hired at a hedge fund, learn the techniques of financial engineering, and apply his gifts in an arena where the same behaviors that sent the original Capone to prison are rewarded with magazine covers and invitations to Davos? I don't know the answer. But I think the question tells us something important about the transformation that's occurred over the past century. We didn't eliminate organized crime. We didn't even really reduce it. We just changed what it looks like, where it operates, and who gets to participate. The impact on ordinary people, lost savings, crashed economies, corrupted institutions, might actually be worse now than it was in Capone's day. But it's all wrapped in legitimacy, protected by complexity, and defended by an army of professionals whose job is to ensure that the people at the top never face the consequences that would apply to anyone else. That's the lesson nobody teaches in school. That's the hidden architecture of power that shapes all of our lives, whether we see it or not. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Comment opened my eyes if this video changed how you see the relationship between crime, money, and power in America. If you made it all the way here, I want to thank you. Seriously. In a world of endless scrolling and 8-second attention spans, the fact that you stayed for this entire journey means something. It means you're the kind of person who wants to understand how things actually work, not just accept the surface-level explanations everyone else settles for. And honestly, that's exactly who this channel is for. So if this conversation resonated with you, if it sparked something or made you think differently about the connections between power, money, and the systems we all navigate every day, hit that subscribe button. Not because I'm asking you to, but because there's more where this came from. This is the kind of content I'm committed to making. The revelations that don't get taught in school, the patterns that hide in plain sight, the uncomfortable questions that actually matter. And if you're subscribed, you won't miss any of it. Drop a like on this video if you felt that connection throughout. It's a small thing, But it tells me that this kind of deep dive is worth the effort, that going beyond the obvious actually lands with people who are paying attention. And leave a comment with the phrase, "Still thinking about this." Because I genuinely want to know that you made it to the end, and I read those comments. Every single one. It's how I know what's connecting and what to explore next. Now, if you want to keep going down this rabbit hole, there's a video right here that takes these ideas even further. Click on it and stay with me over there. I'll see you in that one.